well-wishers, and welcome to my channel Aspiring Minds. In today's video, I'm going to discuss the line-by-line meaning and analysis of Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney, a famous poem. So grab your virtual seats and let's begin. To understand the poem better, you will need a pinch of patience for the next 10 to 15 minutes because within the upcoming 15 minutes, you are going to become the master of Death of a Naturalist, this poem by Seamus Heaney, and I promise you there are line-by-line notes waiting for you to excel in your upcoming examinations. Now, as you see the title of the poem, you might wonder who is a naturalist. Let me explain. A naturalist is someone who studies and appreciates nature and the natural world. It could include the flora, that is the plants, the fauna, that is the animals, the geology, the ecological system, the relationship between animals and plants, and lots more. So we'll see how is this related to the poem. Now, to know a little bit about Seamus Heaney and how he is called a naturalist, he was a renowned Irish poet and Nobel laureate. His poetry often reflects a deep appreciation for the natural world and the Irish countryside. He explores the relationship between human beings and nature. His poems have detailed description of the rural landscape, the farming life, and because of all these reasons, Seamus Heaney is often tagged as a naturalist, not in the real sense of the term, but because of these reasons. Now, Death of a Naturalist is a poem that is divided into two stanzas, and while stanza 1 talks about the childhood times of the poet, the stanza 2 talks about his life in the adulthood stage, and the poet traces the loss of innocence and that change or transformation that comes in the thought process, the perception of the young boy about nature. Now, in stanza 1, the very first line begins with how the poet is describing the scene or the setting of the poem by saying that the flax dam is festered or it is decaying. Flax dam refers to a pond where flax plants have been sown. They are growing in this pond and they are on the verge of decaying, right? And when these plants decay, it is at that time that they will be able to take out the pods to make the fabric, right? In the second line of the poem, the poet says that this flax dam is situated somewhere in the center of the town area, and the flax plants have now grown to their full potential and they are full of seeds. It is only when the seeds get rotten do they become ready to be turned into the fabric. So here in the third line, the flax plants have decomposed, they have become rotten now, and they have been covered with large clumps of soil, huge clusters of soil and dirt. That is the dirty, filthy condition, and out of that you'll see that it will be turned into or transformed into a very nice fabric. This flax dam was exposed to the scorching, terrible heat of the sun. It has faced harsh conditions, and that is how it has now grown to its full potential. These flax seeds are growing in a blue color, and the poet is now telling that how the surrounding of this flax dam included a bubbling, lively atmosphere. There were bottle flies, blue in color, that were flying all around, or it could also refer to the seeds which have now come out in full spring, which are now blue in color. It is at this time that the blue bottle flies are creating a buzzing sound which is filling up the entire flax pond or the flax bogland that is there over here, and they are weaving a delicate fabric, that is the fabric linen is being spun now from this flax pond. first observation that the poet or the speaker in this poem is able to make when he is standing on this flax pond is the warm and thick frog spawn, which resembles clotted water. That is, that warm saliva, that liquid which is there resembling the saliva is all over, and that is appealing to the speaker. What frog spawn over here refers to the eggs of frogs, and the poet is describing that as he was standing over here observing this pond, he could see that there were eggs of frogs which were resembling a jelly-like texture, a jelly-like substance that was there, a gooey substance that was covering up the pond. This jelly-like substance called the frog spawn is found in the shaded areas towards the shore areas of the flax dam or that water body or the pond, and it is a sight which was observed every year in spring. It is at this time that the speaker talks in first person. He says what would he do? He would fill pots, jam pots or jars or containers with this jelly-like substance so that he could take it and observe the growth of the frog. The speaker would take the jars which were full of these eggs of the frogs so that he could observe it. He would keep it in different places of his home, and even he would take it to be observed in school by his friends and his classmates. All of them would be waiting to see how these eggs of tadpoles or frogs would hatch. The speaker describes how he would see these mere specks, these mere dots in that jelly-like substance developing into tadpoles when the eggs would hatch, and they would all be waiting to see this change, this transformation. And at this time, swimming tadpoles, Miss Walls would tell us how. That is, Miss Walls is presumably the name of a teacher who would give them more knowledge about the life cycle of frogs, and she would develop on the knowledge further by observing these tadpoles which were growing in jars or containers. It is at this time that he elaborates further, saying that he would learn from Miss Walls that the daddy frog was called a bullfrog, and she would also teach them about the vocalization of frogs. That is how the frogs would croak by making sounds, and what was the role of the female frogs in the process of reproduction. The speaker further tells that when Miss Walls would teach them about the reproduction process of the female frogs and how it would lay many eggs, the speaker would be reminded about the frog spawn he had observed in his childhood days, and at the same time he also mentions a folk tale that was a common belief at that time, that from the appearance of the frogs you could predict the weather. It is said if the frogs were yellow in color, there was a sunny weather, and if they were brown in color, it predicted or it hinted at a rainy weather. Therefore, we see how the color of the frogs would serve as a natural indication of the prevailing weather conditions. In rain, that is, the frogs were brown in color when it was raining. This is a weather-related folktale which Seamus Heaney tells, and in Ireland there are indeed many folktales afloat, which is why we see the poet also mentioning it in his own works. The poem now shifts in stanza 2 to another context, that is, on one fine hot day, the fields were rank, that is, the fields or the pond was full of the smell of cow dung, and the frogs are described as being terribly angry, foreshadowing or announcing a change in behavior. It is at this time that he no longer is able to see the frog spawn, but the frogs have grown in their full potential, and he hides somewhere in the grass, and what does he see over there? He hears the croaking of sound, or the croaking sound that is being made by the frogs, which is not at all familiar or usual. It rather surprises the speaker, because there has been a change from what he had observed in his childhood to what he is observing now in his adulthood. The air at this time is full of the sound of the croaking of the frogs, which creates a very dense kind of an atmosphere that the speaker does not feel at ease with. The speaker, now when he has come over here, he is observing that dam which is full of frogs, but these frogs have their bellies all swollen up and they are in a very strange kind of a position, all scattered in that pond. The poet is further describing the way in which these frogs are sitting on those clumps or clusters of soil that is there all around the pond. Their necks are moving in a rhythmic motion. Some frogs are hopping about, and the sound that is being made by these frogs in abundance over here is not a very pleasant one. It is disturbing the poet. The frogs are described as sitting in a manner as if there are grenades which are planted on the soil, and if a grenade blasts, it will emit gas. That is the similar kind of a sound that is being made, the sight that is being experienced by the poet. And this is not a very, good description of nature. It's a very unsettling kind of, uncomfortable kind of an imagery that the poet is portraying over here. Looking at this kind of a picture, the poet is utterly disgusted. He turns around, runs away from the situation, and in a sarcastic manner tags these frogs as slime kings because of the disgust that they produce in the mind of the poet. The speaker imagines that the frogs had gathered there to take some kind of a revenge from the speaker, and he fears that if he had to touch these frog span in water, the frogs would attack his hand, which further intensifies this threat that he feels from the frogs, and that is why he chooses to run away from that same site, which was a favorite spot for him, that he spent a major part of his childhood in this area. Therefore, we see in the second part of the poem, the tone shifts dramatically. The speaker remembers a specific incident when the frogs in this flax dam had become utterly aggressive. They invade the pond in large numbers. This once fascinating creatures now appear dirty, grotesque, and threatening to the speaker. The imagery of the frogs' behavior over here is in tune with the descriptions of their gross-bellied bodies and blunt heads farting. The speaker's disgust and fear intensifies, and he decides to run away from the scene, realizing that the frogs have become symbols of vengeance, revenge,